Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives. Is David Champion. He will be talking about 3 areas to focus on if we want to see psychedelic healthcare scale safely. David is the CEO of Maya, a psychedelic therapy intelligence platform designed to bring greater trust, transparency, and measurement to the participant journey. The platform is geared to become the world's largest database of psychedelic health outcomes, fueling insights to help psychedelic healthcare scale safely. David also directs Unlimited Sciences, a psychedelic research nonprofit combining academia with data science to understand underground psychedelic practices and surface best practices to inform further research. In 2019, he served as a campaign lead in the Denver Psilocybin Initiative, helping Denver become the first US city to reform psilocybin policy. Prior, David was co-founder and CPO at Baker Technologies, which he exited after achieving a valuation of $250 million. David, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Psyched.
Thank you so much, Marique. Such a pleasure to be here. And I just want to say how much I've enjoyed this programming today. I think the quality of these presentations and just the content that's been conveyed has been some of my favorite of any event in the space. So thank you again and your team for pulling all this together and giving us a chance to share some of our ideas.
Yeah, thanks so much, David.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to listen. I'm excited to share a little bit about my story and an idea that I think could help us all sort of help this space to get prepared for scaling safely so that psychedelic mental health care can reach the world. So if I may share my screen for a moment, I was invited by Kevin Matthews, who's also a speaker at this event, amazing individual with such a vision, and he put together a team of us in Denver a couple of years ago to help Denver be the first city in this country to reform psilocybin policy. And none of us expected it to pass. It was a complete flyer. We thought it would be an accomplishment if we could even get it on the ballot. And fast forward a year or so, and a lot of goodwill from the people of Denver, and we managed to pass the initiative. And it was just such a shock, but I think it helped knock down one of the first dominoes that inspired the rest of the country to look at their policies and potentially even other places in the world. So I'm really proud to have played a little part in that, although politics is not my game. You'll see that the individual on the left of this picture, Del Jolly, holding his adorable daughter, Mavis, is one of my partners in the nonprofit work that we do, and that's called Unlimited Sciences, along with my amazing pioneer of a co-founder, Heather Jackson, who I recommend everyone look up. She really led the space in cannabinoid research for people experiencing a range of mental health disorders. Just such an inspiration and an unsung hero in my eyes. So please take a look at her work with the realm of caring. So we started Unlimited Sciences with the goal of finding ways to discover how people are using psychedelics in the real world. When I say real world, naturalistic settings, outside of clinical labs and outside of highly controlled environments. We wanted to understand how are people using these substances in all walks of life, and whether there can be anything learned from that that could be brought forward into the sort of codified, systematized psychedelic healthcare system. I'll share more on that shortly. And just briefly, I also run a public benefit corporation. It's called Maya. We have grown the team and company here in Colorado, and we've designed and built a system to become the world's first psychedelic healthcare therapy intelligence platform. And I say intelligence there because the entire system is designed to facilitate a lot of what I'll talk about today, but also to help therapists and practitioners who currently feel quite siloed, often very removed from the ability to gather support from their peers and help them connect with each other over a mutual understanding of how they can offer the best possible psychedelic work. But I'm not going to talk too much about Maya. I really want to focus today on a presentation looking at a big idea, which is if we want to see psychedelic healthcare scale safely, what do we need to focus on? There's a lot. It's a big space, and only a handful of companies really working in this area, companies, nonprofits, and so forth. And I think there are three areas that really deserve a lot of focus, and if put together well with the right systems in place, then I think they'll offer us a chance to truly accelerate the entire space. The three areas are education, measurement, and data science. And I think together, those three will serve us very well in a way that I'll share in a moment. A little on my story. I started my journey with psychedelics in my mid-20s. It was 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I had such beautiful, expansive, peaceful journeys, you know, like probably most of you in the audience and most of us at this event really have psychedelics to thank for realizing so much about what it means to be me, what it means to be in this human experience. It made it very, very confusing, very disorienting. When I was flung, I found myself one day in the most traumatic, challenging day of my life, and it was a challenging psychedelic trip. I truly developed a compassion on that day for what it might be like for somebody going through a psychotic episode, split personality, neuroses, panic. And that day was one of the most important days of my life, inspired a lot of what I'm doing now. And it also left me with real questions. Why was it that that experience had gone in that direction? And when I had taken more of the same compound, or higher doses, different types of experiences with psychedelics before, and they had generally been very peaceful and enjoyable. And so I became fascinated. I had spent most of my career in technology and data. So immediately my mind went to, how could we measure all of the different elements of the psychedelic journey? Could we really quantify the variables of somebody's mindset and the setting they're in and their belief systems and other indications or contributors to the experience that they would have? And so that kernel of a thought emerged in around 2014, 2013. I went into the cannabis space as somebody who has rarely used cannabis, but saw an opportunity to learn from, let's call it, bringing a stigmatized compound or topic into the mainstream with the power of technology and data. And Marique shared a little about that company, but I won't spend too long on it today. With this notion at hand, we're now finding ourselves in a world that I think every single speaker on this stage has shared some highly impressive, highly worrying stat about the state of our species at the moment. I chose that 1 in 4 people are likely to experience a mental health disorder in their lives. 450 million people right now suffering from these conditions. But like I said, every single talk on this stage has emphasized again and again what a severe and urgent situation we're in as a species. Most of the more prominent mental health conditions, thankfully, are being researched with the potential that psychedelics could be a treatment. We're not quite there yet, but it's looking really promising. And if we think that in the next 5 years, 100 million people could avoid or be treated for mental health conditions that are serving them that much pain, then I think it would be hard to think of any other area that I would want to spend my time in finding solutions. Things are moving quickly, as you've seen from the news coming out of Jensen. There's esketamine in production in facilities like this that I think pause many of us in the space and realize, while the power of a psychedelic could be grown in the ground, there's also a tremendous amount of power in creating access that's available through this type of method. And with 60% of people shown by some studies to respond to ketamine when they were already treatment resistant to any other form of medication, there's something to pay attention to here. MAPS absolutely leading the way in codifying the methodologies behind how to treat somebody or how to offer a psychedelic protocol. And looking at a diagram like this that's as established and well-researched as something like the Heimlich maneuver poster that you would see on a restaurant wall, I think it's inspiring to notice that we are starting to codify, we're starting to create the systems to really understand how to offer these drugs in the right kind of settings to the general public. And that's interesting because most of the research, most of the debate has generally been around, well, does a drug work? Does one of these psychedelics work to help somebody with a certain condition? And we're now moving past that. I think the train has left the station in many ways on that question. And now we're looking to, yes, we know it works, but how do we make sure it works the best? How do we create the right containers so that somebody who's going to undergo one of these treatments is going to make sure they have the best possible outcomes? That work has really just begun, though. There are incredible groups out there that are, many of them reputable in their own rights, but especially within the psychedelic space, real trailblazers and very credible ones that are creating curriculums to train the new wave, the new generation of psychedelic therapists. And that doesn't just mean new young therapists. There might be therapists who've been practicing for years or decades, above ground, underground, in different modalities. But the point here is that they are beginning to have access to structured psychedelic therapeutic methodologies via training from groups like this. And those groups will be training the therapists on how to guide somebody through a safe and productive journey from preparation through the facilitation, the integration that we're also familiar with, and then completion. A sort of standard ketamine protocol would look something like this, with a whole range of touch points, time periods, the necessity to measure at different phases, guiding somebody through this multiple guided sessions. I have 3 here. Some clinics are recommending 5, 6, 7 or more. And there are still a lot of questions open, but we are starting to see this structure come into play. And if you think of the average ketamine clinic, the average ketamine offering in America, it would look something like this, sort of representative of what we all are familiar with from a doctor's visit and any kind of clinical environment. And I want to pay attention to the fact that with this as a backdrop, there are also innovators. There are people like Mendel, gave a great talk earlier, Mendel. WavePaths is not only innovating on the sound environments, but the physical space as well. I think his team are doing a beautiful job of imagineering what it could be like to have somebody come in for a therapeutic session and not be sitting in one of those rooms that I just showed, because I don't think that a beige windowless room is listed by psychedelic shamans as one of the sort of favorable environments for deep psychedelic work. Whereas if we can create environments that have all of our sophistication in sound and light and sound and tactile design, then we can create more advantageous containers for this work to happen. There's something to notice there, because most of us, if we think of a psychedelic journey in a ceremonial context, would imagine an environment like this, perhaps something nature-based, something very ritualistic in nature. And I'm pointing out this physical environment. Just my presentation is not meant to focus on the architecture of a clinic. It's meant to identify that there's a big difference here. And so that causes me to pause and wonder if we're going to leave behind the physical container as a paradigm for psychedelic work and adapt these compounds into the standard sort of medical diagnostic clinical environment. Is there a risk that we're leaving something else behind? What about that sensitive moment of knowing when to ground somebody in their journey? What about that moment where it might make sense to introduce a ritualistic item or something that can have somebody remember that they're in a sacred environment and pay homage to this moment in time? The sensory activations coming from smell and sound and light and sound are obviously a huge characteristic of traditional psychedelic work. And Adam Ghazali at his new lab is planning to do incredible work, I think, on the clinical level to understand what might be important about these sort of stimuli and additional components to a psychedelic journey. And obviously there's the communitas element. Robin Carhart-Harris and his team at Imperial have begun the work on understanding and quantifying how important the idea of community is. Martijn, Miles, Rachel, and their team at Synthesis in the Netherlands have demonstrated that they can produce measurably impressive health outcomes by holding group therapeutic containers. And this is just beginning to be understood. So I think it's important that we don't move too quickly into adapting the psychedelic medicine into what we know as the Western medical environment before we measure which of these characteristics are potentially fundamental to the patient's journey. And the therapists that are already operating around the world are asking those questions. They want to know how many sessions they should be offering with a certain compound before they can sort of say confidently that their patient is complete in the journey. They're wondering whether they should be integrating with a patient interstitially throughout the protocol, or maybe focusing more on integration afterwards. They're wondering how a patient's lifestyle or their health history or their dietary choices factor into this work. And I think even modern Western medicine is far away from understanding some of those things. And with the potency of psychedelics at hand, I think it's more important than ever that we understand those elements, or at least make steps to try. The good news is that there are the technologies available. So automating and standardizing the protocols and the way that psychedelic therapists offer their work, whether that's in clinics or underground retreat centers. The ability to issue tests now through the studies that are happening in the psychedelic, in the clinical space, there are these incredible psychometric, psychographic, sociometric, neuropsychiatric assessments that can be used. So what if we bring the power of those devices to the global population of therapists so that they can be measuring their own patients' baselines and outcomes? Same goes for sensing, biometrics, quality of life measures. There's some incredible work happening in the digital phenotyping space. I'd like to shout out AJ Goldstein and his team is doing hugely powerful work as a startup in that space. And likewise, how do we understand the sentiment, the emotions in a patient's video log or audio recording of their session without burdening the therapist with hours and hours of manual time to go back through that footage? And Tyler Braden spoke earlier today, clearly trailblazing with Sessions AI on the NLP and sentiment side. And then we have to analyze all of this. And the problem is we don't know yet what we need to analyze. We can guess, and there are some visionary sort of futurist ideas, but in 5 years, there's going to be so much greater clarity amongst what we should be looking at. And so it's about capturing the data in models like the graph data model that can be retroactively analyzed, where patterns can be spotted. And we can look back 5 years or 10 years in time and see that actually there was an important pattern occurring there that can tell us something about how to improve the treatment for future patients. And I think all of this can feed into incredibly rich learning environments for the therapists. COVID has paused us all in our tracks. Those training schools that I showed the logos for earlier are aware that they can't rely on classroom environments for now. So how do we bring the quality and the richness of their education into the online space and offer digital learning that can afford global access to that education? We could have 10 times, exponentially more therapists being trained over the next year. And by the way, those training schools on aggregate, because we're speaking to most of them, are looking to train several thousand practitioners over the next year alone. And that will keep growing. So imagine how many people that could be qualified to hold this sacred space if we brought that learning online. Now, with the measurement piece, we can collect a lot of vital data. I've covered some of it on the technology slide, but imagine looking through every step of the protocol and breaking down all of the details of somebody's experience, their beliefs, their trust, and the dosage, obviously the medicine itself, and then measuring their outcomes, their sociometrics and psychometrics that tell us about their quality of life even beyond the journey. So 3, 6, 18 months later, looking at their health outcomes we'll be able to detect whether in the cases where somebody dramatically improved their life quality, there were certain factors at play, like a quality of trust for their therapist or a quality of comfort in the environment where they took the psychedelic. And I think with all of that knowledge at our disposal or in our reach, we could meaningfully impact the direction of the clinical research. We could help with groups that are sort of grassroots efforts and national level political advocacy. We could help inform conscientious drug production, help these companies that have spoken today and some of the others that are already pushing the envelope to be conscientious drug producers, and now armed with a wealth of data and sort of analysis around how people are truly using these compounds in the safest, most effective ways, we can arm those producers to really understand which compounds should be brought to market and with which protocols attached to them. Affordable and equal access, highly relevant topic, especially right now, but always. We have it on our shoulders as the privileged members of this community that we can set up the systems now so that it's not even a question in 5 years that everyone of every demographic type would have equal access to this medication or form of treatment. Personalized patient protocols becomes, it's a major question in general healthcare. I think in this space, we're going to be able to set an example because of the spiritually or mystically meaningful nature of these journeys. And we want to empower the support services. There are groups like Zendo, obviously, and Nest and others that are really hoping to accelerate how many people out there are equipped to hold safe space or to guide their friends and their colleagues and their family members through integration. And I think we can really empower those groups who are mainly nonprofit, mainly in a space where they rely on everything that this community as a family can support them with. And together, simplified, this brings a trifecta into being, which starts with the education, teaching therapists what we know now, allowing those therapists and giving them the tools, the technology to make it easy and streamlined for them to measure every detail of what they are facilitating for their patients. And then that data coming in from the individual level, the individual clinic level, can be aggregated, obviously with security, privacy, anonymity in mind, aggregating that data so that we can understand what is being done similarly in the Netherlands and in Costa Rica, and what's being done differently in San Francisco versus Brazil. We're going to need a few things to make this possible. The first is guaranteed privacy. I don't think it's good enough just to put a HIPAA compliant sticker on the label. We need to understand that I'll go back one slide, that there's a sensitivity here. And I think as JR said earlier, most of us in this community are comfortable with the idea of taking a psychedelic journey, and that's not representative of the average. And it's certainly not the ideology we should have if we want to make psychedelics feel as accessible as possible to others. And so guaranteeing privacy, giving people sovereignty to retract or even opt out with their personal data being used, even anonymously. Really generating a space for collaboration between the companies. And this is something that's already happening in a really beautiful way. I'll point out that having spent 4 or 5 years in the cannabis industry and not seeing much of that collaborative spirit, it's wonderful to see how much emphasis there is on transparency and the willingness to share and to partner. I think with the technology at hand, we can form an ecosystem of integrations. So at the API level, allowing companies to be able to share in best practices and understand from each other's workings what's being done well and not. That requires something, it's integrity. We can't trust each other if we can't see evidence or trust that there is integrity and authenticity in the space. And with that, and with all of these 5 in place, I think we have an opportunity to set a new paradigm for business, maybe even for how an entire industry can be formed. There's clearly an opportunity here for us to take inspiration from the ethos of the underground psychedelic world which is built on compassion and kindness and healing and these kind of things, and bring those into the space. North Star, such a powerhouse, such incredible humans running that organization to set a container that we can all buy into and even interpret and adapt in ways that are synergistic, so that we can, I think, set a new paradigm for how business is done. So what happens if we're able to do all of this and move our society past this period? What if it's not 450 million people going through pain and mental health and addiction? And instead we're able to focus in the years to come on how beautiful our minds are. If we can focus on the empathy and the connection in our communities that's available, I think that whether with psychedelics as a tool or not, there's a potential for us to expand exponentially the ideas and the creativity, the ability to create problems to, create solutions to some of the greatest problems that our world is facing right now, and to come together around this exciting potential for what we can create in the world. So with that, I would love to share a short 2-minute video on the work that we're doing on our nonprofit side with Unlimited Sciences. As I mentioned, we came together a year and a half ago, and in 2019, we formed a collaboration with Roland Griffith's team, with Matt Johnston, Albert Garcia, Mary Cosimino, and others at Johns Hopkins. And we spent the better part of last year co-designing a brand new study that will be worldwide, prospective, looking at how people are using psilocybin mushrooms in naturalistic settings. So it's an invitation for anyone in the world who's planning a mushroom journey, whether that's in ceremony, therapy, recreation, to contribute their data privately and anonymously to this study, so that we can all understand what characteristics of their set and setting might have played into the health outcomes, the beneficial outcomes, and also whether there were challenging outcomes as well. So before I click on this, Marika, I'll just ask you if we're good on time for me to show a couple-minute video before taking questions.
Yeah, that should be good.
Great. So can you stop me if you can't hear the sound? Can you hear that okay?
We cannot. If you could actually share your screen, and there should be a box at the bottom with 2 check boxes. Yep.
Great. There it is. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Question.
Okay.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, David.
Watching.
We are running a bit over on time, but I do want to ask one question before you head out. So one of the problems with data, this was actually something that Steph Yin brought up yesterday during her session, is that oftentimes data comes from communities that are not necessarily representative of the general population, especially when it comes to psychedelic assisted therapy. The individuals who will be probably receiving these types of therapies at the beginning are going to be quite homogenous in their demographies. I was wondering if Maya has any ideas of how to be able to diversify the types of individuals who are actually receiving this type of therapy and allow for that to actually feed into Maya's data collection and be able to garner even better results for everything that the platform is able to do.
That is such an important question. We've thought about this, especially on the nonprofit research side to start with, just because we've had an extra year to be thinking about that. And we, now that we have IRB approval on the study, we will be proactively going to the publications and sort of thought leaders, public figures in the various different communities of demographics that aren't usually as readily accessible to these psychedelic protocols. And not necessarily through therapists or ceremony, but knowing that if individuals who are inspired to take a psilocybin journey of their own accord knew about the opportunity to contribute their data, then there would be a greater container for them to sort of measure what they're doing and feel that they are contributing, or also have that channel for Unlimited Sciences to measure the different sources of our participants and make sure that at all stages we're maintaining as much equality in the data as possible. And so the question becomes, how do you slice and dice? How do you sort of narrow down to every demographic type or every segment of our society? And we'll be working with the team at Johns Hopkins to do the best we can in that. It's a topic that they are very focused on as well. And so that's on the nonprofit side. On Maya, the software platform will be available for all psychedelic practitioners. By far and away, the biggest markets right now are in Peru and Costa Rica. And then there are obviously sort of advantages for being in certain countries for obvious reasons, with political differences in the legal status. But again, as a company, we're not just offering software, we're helping to support an entire ecosystem around this space. And that starts with the education. So what we've committed, we don't have specific numbers to this, but we have committed to the educators that we offer our system to in the space, such as MAPS and Synthesis and others, that we will give deep discounts, if not complimentary access to both our training educational portal and our practitioner portal for therapists that are coming from low-income demographics.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, David, thank you so much. Loved having you on. Thank you for your insights. And yeah, we'll continue this chat offline.
Thanks so much again, Rick.
Yeah, appreciate it. Bye-bye.